All right, hello guys, welcome back. It's been a little while. We got a new topic that we kind of started last week, but we're getting more into this week, the progressive era. And the key word here is progress. So things are changing in America. Speaking of America, I just wanted to call out a couple of things. First of all, I hope you like my most excellent shirt today. Feeling patriotic. It is wolves howling at the moon, as set to an American flag backdrop. So Friday was September 11th, so in honor to show some patriotism, I figured I'd wear one of the coolest shirts that I have. Sweet. Also, I think since the last time I saw you guys, I didn't have my lights up and I got them put up. Let me make sure and see, you can see them pretty good. Oh yeah, they look great. Awesome. All right, so in an effort to not waste too much time, I just want to go ahead and get started. We are on US.12 to US.15, so we're moving right along. And like I said already, we're talking about the progressive era. So let's do a quick review and back up just for a moment and go back over the Gilded Age. Remember, the Gilded Age, people are at work. But remember, things are bad during the Gilded Age for the ordinary people in America. Remember, things are really good for the rich people. That's why it gets that Gilded Age term. It looks golden from the outside. But for ordinary people who are at work, things are bad. Conditions are bad. It's a lot of long hours, bad working conditions, things like that. And you get the rise of really big businesses. And a word for big businesses is trusts and monopolies. So we're going to talk about those today and how the government is going to start doing things to try to get rid of these problems and help out consumers and workers. Consumers, that's just it's a fancy way to say people who buy things. So basically we're all consumers, and those of us that work, we're all workers. So this is just going to talk about just Americans in general and how the government is going to help out Americans in general during that time period. So we're in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we're going to talk about what the government does to kind of help out people, okay? Remember to pause the video if you need to. Remember to email me if you ever have any questions about anything. Remember to visit my website where you can find this PowerPoint and the notes that go with it. And let's jump right in. Ready? Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so what is a trust? What is a monopoly? They're basically pretty much the same thing, but what it is a trust is several businesses that get together and take over one industry. And a monopoly is a business that takes over an entire sector of an industry, a sector of the economy. We don't have too many trusts and monopolies nowadays because the government did break them up. However, so we do have really big companies in America that do kind of take over industries. So I'll just name some. For example, in technology, you have kind of the big giants of Microsoft and Google. And those are kind of not necessarily, they're not monopolies, but they are the big companies, and it's hard for smaller companies to compete with this. For the consumer world, we have Amazon and Walmart that kind of go back and forth. And so these things would become monopolies. Let's say Google, if they bought out Microsoft and Microsoft didn't exist anymore, then there would be a monopoly. Google would be the monopoly. Just like if Amazon took over Walmart, then Amazon would be a monopoly, okay? And one day that may happen. It just depends on how things go with business. Now, back in the day, these things were really, really bad. And I'm gonna tell you why here in just a minute. But basically, they take over an entire business, and when they can do that, they can do things such as set prices. They can make products that really aren't as good, but people don't have a choice. And so these are just pretty bad for people overall, for consumers in the economy, okay? So let's keep going. So we're going to see several political cartoons today. It says, one sees his finish unless good government retakes the ship. And you can see Uncle Sam is getting pushed off the boat and the rise of trusts there, okay? We'll talk more about these in just a little bit. We'll see a lot of these political cartoons, but let's just keep going. All right, so the most famous example, and I told you earlier in the year that we would go back to this one, Standard Oil. Standard Oil was the most famous monopoly of the era, okay? I remember it's controlled by John D. Rockefeller, and I'm just gonna go ahead and show you some cartoons. The way Standard Oil worked was that Rockefeller would buy up all aspects of production of oil, okay? So he would buy the land where the oil came out of, so where they're digging, he would buy the land that the oil is on, okay? Then the railroads that took the oil to the refineries, he would buy that section of the railroad, okay? Then he would buy the actual refinery, and then he would buy the places, the warehouses where the oil is distributed. So he controls literally every aspect of this thing. So that means he controls how much the workers are paid all the way down to the little guy. And this is really bad for that little guy because he's completely out of touch. He was the richest man in the world at the time and remains one of the richest people in all of history. So he's going to just focus on getting more and more money and buying up more and more aspects of production, and the workers really get left behind, and the people in America really get left behind because there's no competition in the oil industry because he owns it all. And when he owns it all, he can set whatever price he wants to. Which takes us back kind of to the railroads. Remember, the railroads were charging farmers so much money because they were the only ones who could move those crops quickly enough that the farmers could actually make any money, so they're charging tons and tons and tons. Same thing with this guy. He says, hey, I've got access to the oil. You got to go through me to get it. I'm going to charge whatever I want. And those of you that work for me, I'm going to pay you whatever I want because you're not going to go work for anybody else, okay? So this is bad. This is very, very bad that Rockefeller has this monopoly on oil. And you can see the metaphor here of kind of this octopus taking over the world, and it represents Standard Oil, and you can see people fighting over here, but they don't have a chance. And notice he's the Standard Oil octopus has his tentacles wrapped around our government buildings here, and look, he's headed for the White House right here. It says White House there, okay? So there you go. So Standard Oil is the most famous monopoly at the time. Remember, it's Rockefeller who was in charge of it. And we're going to learn somebody is going to write a book about this that's going to actually expose him and take him down. Let's keep rocking and rolling. All right, so just like I already said, trust and monopolies are really bad for consumers because if they control an entire industry, there's no competition. And when there's no competition, they have no incentive to set lower prices. So they can set really high prices, and they can even sell bad products because they're the only ones making the products, okay? So think about it like this. If Amazon ended up taking over all aspects of business and everybody else had to shut down, okay? And they're making all the clothes, they're making all the food, they're making everything, okay? Thankfully, Amazon doesn't really operate like that, but just think of it as an example, okay? Or think about it like, you could even use Walmart as a better example. So Walmart is making all the clothes, Walmart is making all the food, Walmart's making everything, and you don't have any other choice, okay? They're gonna start making their prices go up a little at a time because you're not gonna be able to go shop anywhere else if Walmart is the only one, right? Okay? Their product quality is probably going to go down because they're like, well, it doesn't really matter. We don't have to make it better because there's nobody else making the clothing, okay? So hopefully you kind of catch where I'm going with that. If not, send me an email and I can explain it a little bit better. But monopolies are bad because if they control everything in the market, then the market is going to turn a little bad, okay? So let's see. Here's a diagram that kind of explains it a little bit more, okay? So just like I said, if they're the ones that have like the only product on the market, they can set any price they choose on that, okay? So let's say Coca-Cola is the only soda that you can buy now. The only Coke product you can buy is Coca-Cola, okay? They are gonna charge really high prices for it because there's nothing else you can buy, and they're like, hey, everybody wants that caffeine, everybody wants that delicious sugary drink, okay? So they're gonna set a really high price for it if there's no other option, right? There's no competition, there's no incentive to lower the price, so they're gonna turn the price up. Okay. Then, after a while, they'll say, well, people are used to it. We're going to just start taking out some of the ingredients and make a less good product. It's the only one they got. They're going to drink it anyway, right? Okay. Then, and that kind of goes together with this one, any incentive to innovate, that means they're just going to keep doing the same thing. Things are never going to change. And eventually, when things stop changing and stop growing, they start to go this way. It's very hard to stay exactly level. They start to go down after a while. And it creates inflation. They're going to jack up the price like I already talked about, okay? All right. Now, monopolies are bad for consumers. That's what we've been talking about. For people who are buying things, you don't want to have to deal with a monopoly. But they're also bad for workers because they realize that they are the only business, and usually they'll come to a town and they'll set up shop, okay? And they'll make their employees work a whole lot. Okay? But they'll pay them enough that where they can make a comfortable living, but you have to work so much that you're kind of just stuck in the job. You don't really have any time to go think about, oh, I might want to go work for this company, or I might want to go work for this company. You're just busy and you're tired and you're working nonstop. And so it kind of keeps you trapped in this cycle of working for the monopoly, okay? So they're really big businesses. So think about like Walmart, okay? Think about if Walmart was the only business in town, okay? And I'm not talking bad about Walmart, I love Walmart. This shirt actually came from Walmart and this shirt's awesome, so hey. But yeah, monopolies, they control, if they are the big business, they're gonna control stuff for consumers and they're gonna control stuff for workers, okay? So they are a very powerful thing, all right? So you can see another cartoon. Lady Democracy has been kidnapped by the trusts, by the monopolies, by the big business, and he's held her captive. And again, this goes back, we've seen this before, the employee gets crushed between low wages and high rent, and then this guy represents the monopoly and the trust, okay? So it's crushing them. All right. So what does the government do? The government's got to take some action because the people are starting to get upset. The people were protesting. Remember, workers were going on strike, okay? So there was a government act. It was called the Sherman Anti-Trust Act. And what it did, the goal was to break up the trusts and monopolies. It says, hey, monopolies, y'all got to chill out. You got to calm down with these prices. You got to pay your workers better, etc. But all it really did was hurt workers. It said labor unions, you can't protest anymore. We got it. We're taking care of it now. We're going to pass these laws, and now labor unions are less powerful. And this doesn't actually work. It's not specific. It just kind of is like, hey, no more monopolies. We're not going to enforce it. The law is there. All right, everybody go about your life. So Sherman Anti-Trust Act is really vague. It's not specific. And it's really overall just ineffective, okay? And here's why. I'm going to show you a cartoon that explains it. You're going to see this cartoon again. This cartoon is very important for this era of history. It's kind of like the quintessential cartoon about monopolies and trusts, okay? So it says, this is a Senate of the monopolists, by the monopolists, and for the monopolists. Okay, so you see the senators all sitting here. So this represents the government, right? You see the senators all sitting here, and look who's behind them, the trusts. Okay, so the trusts and the monopolies. Look, Standard Oil is the biggest one there, and the steel beam trusts. So what this symbolizes is it's calling out the corruption of the Gilded Age. Remember, they had a big problem with corrupt politicians receiving money from big companies like the railroad. Okay, so this is calling out the corruption of the Gilded Age, the corruption of politics, and it's calling out the corruption of these monopolies paying politicians to do what they want. So it shows, hey, these are the people who are really actually working in the government, and these people are kind of corrupt and getting paid off by them, and they're not looking out for the workers, okay? Now, we're going to get to a president. His name is Teddy Roosevelt, and we're going to learn a lot about him soon. We're going to touch on him briefly today, but we're going to learn a lot more about him soon. But he's going to go after this idea. Teddy Roosevelt is a good president as far as being a man for the people. Okay, he takes care of people's interests in America. We're going to learn a lot more about him later, but he's going to go after these things, okay? And here he is right here. So Roosevelt comes into power and he says, hey, we got to go after these trusts. We need to take care of the people. We need to look out for the people. And he becomes known as America's trust buster. And you see that word right here. He's a trust buster. He files all these lawsuits against monopolies and trusts. He goes after the Northern Securities Trust, the Beef Trust. He goes after the railroad. He finally starts to take action against these big businesses and corruption. So for Americans and the economy and consumers, Roosevelt's a pretty good guy. He does have kind of a dark side on the imperialistic side, but we're going to get to that in several weeks. So don't worry about that right now. What you need to know about Teddy Roosevelt, is that he is a trust buster, okay? Now, there are two other presidents. So we got Roosevelt that goes after trusts. Also, Taft goes after trusts, okay? He kind of is just Roosevelt part 2 when it comes to this. So Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson is the other one, are the ones that go after the trusts, okay? And Taft is actually successful in getting Standard Oil broken up in 1911, okay? So Roosevelt, he's called a trust buster. Let's look at some cartoons. I really like these cartoons. Number one, they're kind of funny. And number two, they make a really good point, okay? So you can see Teddy Roosevelt here, he's gone hunting. He was a big famous hunter, and you know there's the famous story about him not shooting the young bear, and it became the teddy bear. If you got questions about that, email me and I'll tell you the story. All right, so notice though, let's pay attention to the cartoon. Teddy Roosevelt, he has killed the bad trusts, right? And this guy's running off. He probably represents another trust. Look, the good trusts he has on a leash, and the leash says restraint. So it's the government taking ownership of getting rid of the bad trusts and putting restraints on the good trusts. And I really like this one. He's knocked down all these trusts. It says beef trust, oil trust, railroad trust. So these big businesses, he knocked them out, and it said over here it says everything in general. Okay, so it's showing Roosevelt he's just going after everything. Okay, so Roosevelt looks out for the consumers and he looks out for the workers. Decent president as far as that is concerned. Okay, Roosevelt the trust buster. All right, now. So later comes along this thing. It's called the Clayton Antitrust Act, and this comes under Wilson. So I told you Roosevelt, he's the first one that's a trust buster. Taft is another, and then now we've got Wilson. Okay, and what the Clayton Antitrust Act does is it actually nails down the language of, hey, we're going to do this specifically to these trusts. The trusts have to follow these specific rules, and the trusts have to do this. So it's like. It also allows boycotts and protests. So this really goes after the monopolies. Sherman is kind of vague. I told you, they didn't really do anything. They're like, well, the government's now keeping an eye on trusts. Clayton is like, hey, you can't have this trust. You can't do this. You got to let people protest. You got to let your workers boycott. You got to let people do this, okay? So this is a much better law as far as that. So all it really does to speak generally about these things is it uses more specific language and fixes these loopholes. A loophole is a way for businesses to get around certain laws, but Clayton just nails things down. So more specific language and fix the loopholes of the Sherman antitrust laws, okay? So Wilson, again, another trust buster. So the ones you need to know, and I know this is kind of a weird thing to learn at 17, you're probably like, why do I have to know this? But it's just, we're learning about the role of government. Where does the government fit into all this? And this is what we're learning, okay? So Wilson, Taft, and Roosevelt are the three you need to know as far as going after the monopolies and trusts. All right? So you can see a few more. Monopolistic trust is blocking the road, the highway of competition, and look, the Federal Trade Commission is going to come in and block it. Okay, bust it up. All right, so let's answer these. There we go. How do trusts and monopolies become wealthy organizations? What did I tell you? They buy up all aspects of a certain business. Buy up all aspects of a certain business. And the next part says, what is the most famous example of a monopoly from the Progressive era? The most famous example, so most famous, was Standard Oil. Standard Oil. There we go. Let me check and see how the glare looks on the video, because it's kind of got a glare over here. All right, you can see that pretty good, I think. Yeah. Sweet. Let me fix this B. Kind of looks like an L. There we go. All right. Why are monopolies detrimental? Detrimental means bad. Why are monopolies bad for both consumers and workers? Let's do this. For consumers, they can set high prices. Okay. Set high prices. And for workers, they made their workers work long hours for low wages. Long hours and low wages. There we go. All right. So the Sherman Antitrust Act is the subject of this one. It says, how did the Clayton Antitrust Act fix the problems of the Sherman Antitrust Act? Remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act used vague language, and it basically didn't do anything. It was like, hey, the government's now watching you, monopolies. Didn't actually make any rules. So Clayton Antitrust Act, it used more specific language. And fix the loopholes. Loopholes are ways that a company can get around certain laws. So, and fix the loopholes. Sherman Act. There we go. Cool. Why is Teddy Roosevelt known as a trust buster? Why is TR known as a trust buster? He filed over 40 lawsuits against trusts. He filed over 40 lawsuits against trusts. And I know that sounds weird that a president is filing a lawsuit, but the president has to follow the law when it comes to wanting to get things done. He can't just be like, oh no, you're done. I'm the president, you have to listen to me. The president has to follow certain standards too, okay? And then number 5, besides Roosevelt, which American presidents targeted trusts during the Progressive Era? There are 2 more. One you probably don't know much about, his name is Taft. And the other, we're gonna learn a lot more about later, is Wilson. Taft and Wilson. All right, remember to pause the video if you need to. I'm gonna check it again just to make sure you can see it well. Looks great, and we're only 20 minutes in, perfect. Let me grab a swig of water, and I'll be right back, okay? Pause it if you need to. All right. Okay, let's get that going. Ready? Ready. Take a break if you need to. We're gonna move on to the next standard, which is standard 13. I'm going to tell you this one is a lot more interesting, and that's why I went ahead and put my hat on, because I'm a little more excited to teach this part. I don't really care about talking about business. It gets old. I like to talk about what humans are doing, not what businesses are doing. Also, I forgot, I just realized, I do have shoes on today. It's raining today. Hopefully you can see. I'm really sore. I played in a softball tournament the other night, and I'm getting old, and I feel it. Bummer. I do have shoes on because it is raining and the floor was wet, and I didn't want to fall on video. That would have been weird. But anyway, that's off topic, but let's go. Is it blinking? Oh, it's blinking. Perfect. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is something a lot more interesting and a lot more relevant and stuff you might care about just a little bit more than monopolies and trusts. Even I teaching that stuff, I was like, this is kind of boring. But this is going to be a little bit more exciting. So now we're going to talk about working conditions during this time period. So what is the problem during this time period? And things are pretty bad during this time period, especially for women and children. This is the time period in America where women really start going to work. They're going to start going to work even more later in during World War I and then World War II, but it starts here at the end of the Gilded Age, right around the turn of the century, 1900, and moving forward, okay? And remember, children could go to work at this time period too, so I'm going to show you some pictures of them working too. All right, now, the problem with this is, though, it's great that women went and got jobs and were able to work. It's great that women are getting these rights now, because remember, women didn't have many rights back then. It's just kind of crappy in history, the way women were treated. And so women, when they would go to a job, they were only expected to work certain jobs, mainly in textile factories. Textiles are clothes. By the way, you should tell your parents next time you want some new clothes that you should say something like, I fancy some new textiles, and see what they say. That'd be funny. But women usually face a lot of discrimination. They would have to work really long hours for a lot less money than men would get paid. And most of the time they work 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. And yeah, just really not good conditions that women had to work in. So I'm just going to show you some pictures and you can just see. So imagine sitting here 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, and a lot of times they weren't allowed to talk. They're not really allowed to leave. They get certain breaks at certain times, and that's the only time they're allowed to leave. So they're kind of stuck here at these desks, and they're not allowed to talk. They're not allowed to like bring anything with them, and it's just so many rules that they had to follow, and they're getting paid less, okay? So you can imagine sitting in these places 12, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's hot, no AC, it's cold in the winter. Can't move, can't talk. Yeah, it's just not a good situation, and you're not even getting paid that much. However, though, women took this as an opportunity. Even though they're not making that much money, they took the money they had, they got together and they said, hey, you know what? We can start here and we can get rights for ourselves, because now we got a little money in our pocket and together we can make a change. They saw things like how the Granger movement with the farmers, how they were successful even though they were struggling. The women were like, hey, They did it, we can do it too, okay? So now what they're really voting for, or what they're really wanting together, and I kind of just gave you the answer, is the right to vote, women's suffrage. Remember, suffrage sounds like a bad word, but it means women's right to vote. Women's suffrage is women's right to vote. Suffrage is a good thing, even though it sounds bad. So if anybody ever says end women's suffrage, they're saying end women's right to vote. So don't tolerate that. You should have some words with them, okay? So these women, they get all together and they say, hey, we've got resources now, we've got unity, let's work together and fight for the right to vote, okay? And we're gonna talk a whole lot more about the women's suffrage movement next week, I believe, okay? So you can see here, women starting to protest, votes for women, which is very good. All right, now, children. We've already seen children working in factories. I already showed you a picture of that. But children were, actually, employers wanted children to come work for them, especially in factories. Number one, you don't have to pay them that much because they're just kids and they'll take whatever they can get. Secondly, they're small. So if a machine breaks down or something, the kid can reach their little hands in there and fix it easier than an adult. And also, you can yell at a child and scare them, and they won't protest or go on strike or anything because they're too afraid. So, yeah, those are the three reasons, really, is that they're small and they're easy to maneuver. You can control them very easily, and you don't really have to pay them that much. All right? So it's not good. Not good. So let's look at some pictures. This one really makes me sad. I think it's his big, sad eyes. Yeah. You can see how dirty he is. And that kid's probably like 5 years old, maybe. Then you can see the dirty kids here, probably been working in a coal mine. You can see the girl here sewing, working on textiles. Remember that word, taught you a new word today. Okay? So, yeah, kids working. This is not good. And remember, they're getting paid a lot less. It's very unsafe for kids to be working. Because you think, look at all these boys together. When they get down in the coal mine, they're probably messing around a little bit, horsing around, probably got in trouble, maybe even got hurt, okay? So, not a good situation. Now, a lot of people were against this. They did not want kids going to work. They saw these problems, and kids would get killed at work, okay? It's dangerous to work in a factory. So a lot of people wanted to end this. However, this doesn't actually end until 1938, and it's something called the Fair Labor Standards Act. And basically said anybody under 16, you can't go to work in these big factory jobs or anything like that now. I know nowadays you can work at certain places when you're like 14 or 15, but mainly 16 is kind of the starting age for working. Now, this seems like it's made for a good reason, this ending child labor. Actually, notice, it ended in 1938. That's kind of right in the middle of the Great Depression. And the reason why they stopped letting kids go to work is because they needed to give those jobs to adults who weren't working. So when this actually ended, it didn't really have much to do with being nice to kids. It was more about giving jobs to adults who were out of work during the Depression. So keep that in mind, it's just kind of funny. So it is good that we do have child labor laws. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. Child labor law is fantastic. Kids don't need to be going to work. Kids need to be being kids. Kids need to go to school and get education. But it is funny that the real reason why it ended is because it wasn't like, hey, we're looking out for the kids. It's like, hey, we're looking out for the adults that need a job. All right? So some more cartoons. You can see the skinny little kids' legs under here. They're getting crushed by the large hand of the child labor employer. You can see the poor kids, they're pulling the chariot. This kid's already like passing out. It says child labor exploiter, big man riding in his Roman chariot. And I think he's got a little skull on his hat there. Man, oh man. He needs a Viking hat instead, doesn't he? All right, so there we go. That was a quick little lesson. So let's go ahead and answer these questions. And we're almost ready for the last segment that we have to discuss today. All right, so number 6. What problems did women face in the workplace during the early 1900s? Long hours, low wages, and discrimination. Okay? Discrimination. So that means that they would be turned down for certain jobs and only hired for others. And remember, I told you they're mainly hired to work in clothing factories, textiles. Discrimination, long hours. Remember, they're working 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. That's crazy. Discrimination, long hours, low wages, low pay. Okay? But despite their difficulties, how do women use employment opportunities to earn more rights? Okay? So they worked together because now they're getting all together. This didn't happen before. Usually they were stuck at home, not really talking to anybody all day long. Now they're able to work together and they're able to start talking and having this discussion. I told you at work they couldn't necessarily talk, but of course everybody gets off at the same time, and then they're like, hey, let's talk about some stuff. They work together to begin the women's suffrage movements. And remember, suffrage is right to vote. There we go. And then why were children employed in industries in the early 1900s, and then when did child labor laws become effective? So children, remember what did I tell you? The boss could easily scare them, so children were easily manageable. They're small, which is good for fixing things. Okay? And you could pay them very little, paid very little. Okay, so that's your first answer on that one. And then the second answer, I'll draw an arrow down to here so that way you know the difference. When did child labor laws become effective? That is 1938. Remember, that's actually during the Depression. And we'll actually come back to talking about child labor again when we get there. All right, so remember, women had a tough time in the workplace. They're working a lot of long hours. They're not getting paid very much. They're only allowed to work certain jobs. It's really bad. But in spite of all that, they got together and they began the women's suffrage movement. And remember, kids were also employed because they were easy. You could easily boss them around. They were small, so they could get in those tight spaces and work on things. You didn't have to pay them very much. But remember, in 1938, that all changed, and they got rid of child labor. Let me check and make sure you can see these answers. Looks good enough to me. Very good. Remember to pause it if you need to. Remember, email me with any questions you have. And we're going to go ahead and rock and roll and finish this thing up because we only got one more standard in this lesson. All right, actually I think we have two more standards, but that's okay because this part's really interesting. All right, so the next part, Muckrakers and progressive idealists. Okay, so those are both new words that you haven't heard before, but they're very, very easy. I can explain them right now. All right, so let's break these down. First one, there are two words in it. Muck. Muck is like mud or dirt or anything bad, okay? So think about that. Then rakers, what is someone who rakes? It's a raker, so like this. Okay, so they're raking the muck. And it doesn't mean literal like going out and raking the mud. What this is talking about is they're going to look at businesses and they're going to expose bad things about them. So I told you muck can mean bad things, okay? So muckrakers are people who expose bad things. You've actually already learned about one. His name is Jacob Riis. Remember, he was a muckraker in that he exposed how bad life was for poor people in America. So you actually already learned about muckrakers. Haha, you didn't even know. Wow. We're going to talk about more today. And then there's also progressive idealists. So remember this word progress means changes, moving forward. Idealists are people who have ideas. So idea of progress. So these people are going to make good things happen, all right? And there are several of them, all right? These are the ones you need to know. We already talked about one here, Teddy Roosevelt. Remember, he went after the trust, so that's how he's good at this. These other few we're going to get to right now, okay? So a muckraker, again, is just somebody who goes after these bad companies and shows all the bad things that they did. So what they did is, their real point was to write brutally honest stories and show brutally honest pictures of how life really was. And one of the areas that we're going to talk about is the meat industry and how gross it was during the day. And I'm not going to tell you any secrets. Let's just go ahead and go. But remember, muckrakers, they expose problems with businesses. So they're raking in the muck. They're showing all the nastiness that's going on with all these big businesses. So corruption, like all those scandals, like with the railroad and the government. Bad working conditions and bad living conditions, like Jacob Riis showed. And just the overall social and political issues that were in America at the time. So this is where we start to get some change. We start to get progress. So you see all these words combined together? So it's all very good, all right? All right, so Ida B. Wells, she says, the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. And we'll learn more about her later, all right? Okay, so like I said before, Muckrakers use these stories, these exposés, excuse me. I promise I'm not sick. I promise. It's a weird world. You can't even cough anymore. People get freaked out. But Muckrakers, again, they write these stories. They're called exposés. And exposé just means to expose something. And they do this to push for reforms, okay? And reforms are changes to fix things. And so reforms, progressive idealists, they have ideas to make progress, okay? Email me if you got any questions about that, or you can even Google it. But Muckrakers, they write these stories, and these are the big ones, okay? Jacob Riis, he didn't actually really write stories. He took pictures. He let his pictures do the talking. Upton Sinclair, he writes a book called The Jungle, and you may actually read it in English class. I'm not sure. I know the kids last year read it. I don't know if it changes this year. And then this lady, Tarbell, we're going to learn about her. She actually is the one who takes down Standard Oil. Remember Rockefeller, the big monopoly that was corrupt and people couldn't, they're stuck buying all of his products. She's going to end that, okay? She's going to write a story about him. All right, a true story. All right, so the first one. This guy is not a muckraker. He is a progressive idealist, okay? And what he says is that we need to change the way that we elect our leaders. His name is Robert M. La Follette. Some people say Lafayette. I say La Follette, however you want to say it. But anyway, he is a leader in Wisconsin, and this is him, and he has very cool hair. That's Robert La Follette. But what he says is that in order to get people more involved in politics, instead of just having some candidate that just appears, the people should choose a candidate and send him forward. So he comes up with this idea of a direct primary. And what that is, it's a vote before the actual election. And we still have this today. It's where people go out and vote and say, hey, I want this guy to be the candidate. It's not the candidate just appears on the ballot. The people are the one who put the candidate on the ballot. Now, this really goes back to something we've already been talking about. So remember, money was a big influence in politics. And who has the money at the time that we're learning about? The railroads. Remember, the railroads controlled a lot of aspects of government. Monopolies like Standard Oil did too. And so now, La Follette believes if people can ignore this part and just vote for the people they want and choose those people in the direct primary, it's just another word for a pre-election, then you get a model state with good laws. So you get a much better government, okay? And I honestly think people should have voted for him just because of his most excellent hair. But that's Robert M. La Follette, and he believes in a direct primary election, which is having an election before the actual election. So you choose your candidates before. All right, now we get to the exciting stuff. Upton Sinclair. He wrote a book called The Jungle, and here's the deal. The meat packing industry, which did all the meat in America, they package the meat in cans and send it out to the stores, and then the stores sell it to you. They were disgusting, okay? I'm going to read you, or if you want to, you can read it on your own. You can pause it so you don't have to listen to me read. But I want you to just look at this. I'm gonna move away and I'm gonna read it to you, okay? It says, there was never the least attention paid to what was cut up for sausage. There would come all the way back from Europe, old sausage that had been rejected. Look, that was moldy and white sausage. It would be dosed with borax and glycerin. So those are chemicals. They're pouring chemicals on the sausage and dumped into the hoppers. A hopper, it chops up the meat and puts it all together, okay? And made over again for home consumption. Oh, man. All right, I said I wasn't going to read to you or get in the way, but look. The meat was moldy and white. They put chemicals on it, and then they made it over again for you to eat at home. All right, let's keep going. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust where the workers had tramped, meaning they walked there, and spit uncounted amounts of germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms. The water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dried dung. If you don't know what dung is, it's poop. Ew. A man could sweep off handfuls of dried rat poop. Ugh. And it says these rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. The rats would die, and then rats, bread, poisoned bread, and meat would go into the hoppers all together. So the hopper is where all the meat goes, and it gets chopped up, turned back into regular sausage that has chemicals already in it after it's been stored in a room where rats have been running on it and pooping on it. They put it all in there, they chop it up, mix it up really good, they put it in a can, and it goes to you. Now, this is not true anymore, hopefully. I don't actually know. But hopefully it's not true anymore. Because this was written by a guy named Upton Sinclair, okay? And it's true. This is a true story. This is the jungle. You should read it. It's disgusting. Okay? And he went to these meat packing factories. He was like, hey, I'm going to write a story about what's going on here because people need to know this. And it changes things, okay? So it gets all these laws passed. And we're going to actually talk more about these laws later. But this is so gross that this actually happened. Now, this is muck-raking journalism because this is muck, right? The muck is what was happening, all these problems, all this nastiness. And Upton Sinclair is raking it in and writing a story about it, okay? So, this is really bad. He exposed these problems. Gross, right? Terrible, disgusting. And things are going to start changing. There's going to be something called the Meat Inspection Act. We don't actually cover it in this lesson. It's in the next lesson. But there's going to be things that change this. So there are actually laws now that fix this stuff. But isn't that so gross? Wow. Really gross. And we're going to come back to that. So if you like learning about that stuff, I really like learning about this stuff. I don't know why. I guess I'm gross. But we're going to learn more about that later. So don't forget about that. So if you like that, there's more to come. Okay? Just not in this lesson. All right, now. So there's other types of muckbreakers besides just the gross meat packing ones. There's this guy, Lincoln Steffens, and what he did is he wrote this story called The Shame of Cities. And in it, all he talks about is, hey, the government's really corrupt. So he points out people like Boss Tweed. Here, I'll show you a picture. He points out people like Boss Tweed, and he's got a goal in this. He says, hey, people, we need to get back out there, and we need to take control of our cities from these corrupt politicians. We need to get out and vote. We got to save our cities because with them, things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. And remember, he was super corrupt. He was stealing taxpayers' money, Boss Tweed was. And so he's calling out these people. So he's a muckraker in that he sees this corruption as the muck and he exposes it, all right? So a muckraker is just someone who exposes corruption and exposes bad things like the jungle. All right, now, Ida Tarbell, I think she's the last one we have to learn about. She wrote a story about Standard Oil, and it brought down Standard Oil. She showed the corruption. She talked about how Rockefeller was controlling all these prices, and he controlled all aspects of the oil industry. And she brought it down. People saw this, and they voted for all these antitrust laws and things, and they're like, yo, we got to get rid of Standard Oil. It's really, really bad. So Ida Tarbell, she is a female muckraker, and so yeah, this is Ida Tarbell. And excuse me, and again we see the cartoon about it. But just remember, Ida Tarbell, she brought down Standard Oil. Okay? There we go. All right, now, the reason why this works, and you saw how it worked on me. I got very excited when I read that. People like to read this stuff. People get excited when they read this stuff. They're like, oh my gosh, is that real? Are you serious? And when they read it, they get all excited, and then they contact their government, and they're like, yo, you got to do something about this, man. This is crazy. Okay? So this leads to reforms. So these muckrakers really do a good job of showing a lot of problems of the era and helping them get changed, okay? So this is very, very good that this happened, even though like things like the jungle is pretty gross, okay? So remember, muckrakers, they write these exposés, they expose problems, and then things get fixed. And another word for them is progressive idealists, ideas of progress, okay? So you can see the actual rake there, and they're pushing out the corruption in government there. And it says, the muckrakers are here. All right, cool. If you have any questions about that, email me. And if you want to talk about the jungle, email me. I love that story. All right, number 9. How did the writings of muckrakers and progressive idealists lead to change in American society? They exposed the problems. Expose the problems. The problems in business and society. And showed a need for change. Obviously, especially like with the jungle, and don't worry, we're going to come back to the jungle again. If you read something like that, you're going to say, wow, we need a change, for sure. I don't want to be eating that nasty meat anymore. Which is so gross that people actually would eat that. And you know people got sick. All right. Why did Robert La Follette, he was the guy with the cool hair, and he pushed for the direct primary. Remember the direct primary, that allows people to choose candidates before the election, and hopefully it gets the corrupt influence of money out. Why did he push for this? What is he trying to give people? He wants people to have a larger voice in politics. So that's what we'll write. He wanted people, I'm going to put PPL just to save time. He wanted people to have a larger voice in politics. So it's a push for more equality. It's a push to end corruption. It's good. It's very good. Okay. Number 11. How did Upton Sinclair's The Jungle lead to reforms in the meatpacking industry? Well, you read something like that, aren't you going to be inspired to want to make a change in this? Absolutely. So, exposed the horrible conditions in Chicago's meat plants. And it's not just Chicago where this is happening. Okay, it's all these big cities that have these big meat plants, these big meat factories, where they're just bringing in lots of animal product and they're not really following any rules at all. And we're talking about the rules. There's going to be a rule called the Meat Inspection Act. And there's another one that's like the Food and Drug Act or something. But anyways, it tells about you have to have all the ingredients listed and it has to have all this information. And it just shows that somebody came in and checked their work, which is really good. I want somebody checking the work on my food for sure. Let me take a look and make sure you can see these, okay? Looks good enough. Pause it if you need to get these answers, and let's rock and roll. Right. Number 12. What did Lincoln Steffens' The Shame of Cities? Remember, this is a story that shows the corruption of people like Boss Tweed. What does it encourage people to do? Get out, vote, and take control of their cities. So basically it says, hey, the shame of cities is that we're not paying attention to all these corrupt politicians. We're letting this go. And he's saying, you got to pay attention to what your politicians are doing. You got to pay attention to what your leaders are doing. And we got to take back control of our cities. And take back control of cities and governments. Which is very good. People need to be involved. And the best way to be involved is to vote and to be informed on the issues. How was Ida Tarbell influential in the dissolution of Standard Oil Company? She is a muckraker. And we need to include that, yes, she is a woman, because remember, women, unfortunately, during this time, weren't able to have much of a voice in anything. So she was able to actually bring down the biggest company really in the world at the time. So we'll say she wrote a muckraking. We need to include that word. You need to be writing that word for sure. She wrote a muckraking book that brought down Standard Oil. She exposed the corruption. She showed it was a bad company. She showed monopolies are bad. Cool. And then number 14, what types of reforms resulted directly from the writings of Muckbreakers? Okay, so we get social and political reforms. What else do we get? Think about Standard Oil. We get anti-monopoly laws. And we're going to get, we didn't talk about medicine today, but it's going to come with the food and drug stuff. And that comes, I believe it's in the next lesson or maybe the one after that. But we get better food and drug laws. You need to know what's in your medicine. You need to know what's in your food. You need to know somebody is keeping an eye on that stuff because that's what goes in your body. Ugh, gross. Better food and drug laws. So people, really these people, these muckrakers, they're kind of looking out for everybody. They're kind of taking care of us, okay? So that's very good, all right? And these are just journalists today. A lot of journalists nowadays, it's like that's what they write, okay? So it looks good from here. Almost an hour in. Let's see if we can finish in just about an hour. We're at 50 minutes right now. So pause if you need to. Take a break if you need to. This is a really big lesson, I know, and I'm sorry. But hey, we're getting a whole week's worth of notes done in one day. Wow. All right. So last one, and we're getting into government and politics a little more here. This thing makes my head itch, by the way. I'm gonna take it off for just a few minutes because I'm getting sweaty. I don't want to be all gross. Ugh. All right, so now we're learning about a little bit more into the politics aspect of it and government. There are some new words you're going to learn. And to be honest, these words you might forget pretty fast. Try to remember them, but I know this stuff gets a little bit boring. I don't really like government type stuff. I like to talk about like the meat industry and the jungle. I like the human part of history, but we do have to talk about government. So here's what we got to learn this time. Initiative, referendum, and recall. Adoption of the primary system, and we kind of already talked about that with Robert La Follette. The primary system, all it is, it's an election before an election, and so it's super easy. 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, and 18th Amendment. And honestly, I'll be perfectly upfront with y'all, I'm not good at remembering amendments. I'm not good at remembering like, 15, 14, I don't know what they all are. But I can tell you how things changed in history, okay? So maybe you think I'm not qualified, I'm sorry, but I'm not that type of history teacher. Names and dates are great, but they'll make you really good at Jeopardy. I want you to understand how things were actually changing in society, okay? So let's keep rocking and rolling, because I'm just wasting time at this point. So here we go. These are very good things that happen to the government, though. So initiative, what that means is that this is kind of like the right to petition. With enough signatures, voters, people like you and me, we get enough signatures about an issue, say, hey, I want to change this law because there's something wrong with it. So let's just use an example. I would like to change the voting age to be 16 or whatever. Just think of a law you would change. I would like to change this law. I can go out, get 5,000 people to sign underneath it, and it will go on the voting ballot. I don't know the actual number it takes. But what it means, initiative, just means you can initiate change by getting people to support your cause. Okay, next thing, referendum. This goes actually with the laws, okay? So this is where you can change the laws. They can ask for specific laws or legislation to be repealed, taken away. So this is where you can get something new on the voting ballot, initiative. Referendum is where you can get it changed or taken away. And recall means that you can get someone taken out of office. So it's a little bit like impeachment. So initiative, referendum, and recall. And again, I know those are confusing words, and you saw me get a little bit confused even explaining it. So just know that these are ways that voters get more of an influence. Voters get a larger voice because of initiative, referendum, and recall. And guys, that's what we really need in America, is for voters to have more and more power, because the power belongs to the people at the end of the day. If we are to be a true democracy, by the way, we're actually a republic, but if we are to be more of a democracy, this is the kind of stuff that we needed. And this happened back in the day. So initiative, you can get an issue on the ballot. Referendum, you can change specific laws or legislation. And recall, you can get someone pulled out of office if they've done something wrong. Okay? So there again, there's another slide. You can pause there if you want to see it. We're going to keep on moving. But just like I said, because of these things, it's just giving Americans more of a participation, more of a voice in the political process. So that's a very good thing, okay? So there you go, some more stuff, okay? Now, the primary system. The primary system is just like I already told you. So nowadays, because of this in our elections, the voters get to choose before the election who they even want to be in the election. So it's not just like on election day, the candidate shows up, this is your only choice, this is the guy you gotta vote for, or the lady you gotta vote for. Now you get to choose beforehand, and in that way it gives you more of a voice. So initiative, referendum, and recall, those are all really good. They give you more of a voice, and this does too. The primary election helps you have a bigger voice in government too. So this is good. This is called social reform. These are the progressive idealists, what they got done for us, okay? All right, just to keep moving right along, because I know this video is getting long. 16th Amendment, what it does is it creates a national income tax. Before this, there was only state income tax, but notice this is a national income tax. So American government says everybody in America is going to pay a little bit of money. And this is good. This is believed to help out the poor people, because progressives say, hey, these poor people are getting left behind. And we've talked about this already. They need help. These rich people at the top, they need to be contributing a little more. It's not really fair to the rest of society that they get to have all the money and be this small of a group. So they need to pay some income tax. So this creates a national income tax. So 16th Amendment, national income tax, okay? Keep rocking and rolling. 17th Amendment, all right, so here's the deal. Before 1913, which is way before any of us were alive, the state legislatures chose who the senators were going to be. So you can see how that would be really corrupt, because remember, the governments at the time were pretty corrupt. So they're going to choose who they want to be senators, and things are never really going to get changed. Things are going to just keep going the same way. The 17th Amendment says people, us, citizens, now vote for senators, not just getting handpicked by state legislators. So the 17th Amendment means people vote for senators. 17th Amendment, senators, okay? And again, if you forget these, I understand. Just know that the point is that now voters are getting a larger voice in the government, okay? All right, and last one, and we're going to go over this one a lot more later. We're going to talk about this one a lot. This starts an exciting time period in American history, Prohibition. Prohibition gets rid of alcohol. Now, remember, I touched on this very briefly in the last lesson. Progressives, these people who want change, believe that alcohol was really tearing down American society at the time. And so they thought, hey, let's make a law that gets rid of it completely. But here's the problem. When they outlawed alcohol, all it did was create a huge criminal class of people who still went after the alcohol and who still figured out ways to do it. So 18th Amendment is prohibition of alcohol. We're going to learn way more about that later when we get to the 1920s and 1930s. And there's some really interesting history behind this. We get to talk about stuff like Al Capone and stuff like that. So 18th Amendment gets rid of alcohol because the progressives believed, hey, we can fix America complete. We're giving people more voice. We're helping out women and kids, all that stuff. And so prohibition will get rid of alcohol and it'll just make things even better. All right. Kind of sped through that one a little bit, but the point is, and I'm going to write it over here at the end. Don't let me forget. I'm going to put a star so I don't forget. But let's go through these answers real quick, and I'll tell you the overall point of this. So the adoption of the initiative, referendum, and recall gave Americans a larger voice in politics. That says recall. Handwriting got real bad there. I think I'm going to fix that. Recall. Okay? What is the purpose of the primary election system? Allowed voters to choose candidates before the election. Before okay. 16th Amendment created a national income tax. Created a national income tax. 17th Amendment, voters choose senators. And 18th Amendment made alcohol illegal. Ooh, hang on, there we go. Made alcohol illegal. Okay, so again, I know that's a lot of vocabulary, it's a lot of amendments, and I know that stuff is hard to remember. Here's the takeaway that I want you to remember. Here's the takeaway. Americans have a bigger voice in politics. Americans have a bigger voice in politics. So it's getting away from this money driving politics. It's getting away from these corporations and trusts and monopolies and the railroad taking control of the government. And it's giving some power back to the people, which is very, 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 very good, okay? This is what we want. This is the goal for America. And remember, like I said, I'm not big on you having to know all these, like, oh, you need to know what the 16th Amendment is. You need to be able to recite it to me. Not big on that. This is what I want you to know, is to understand things were getting better during the progressive era. That's why it's called progress. Things are getting better because Americans, their rights are getting better. They're getting a bigger voice in politics. Women can now go to work, even though they're having a crappier time at work. They're not getting paid that much and stuff. Remember, also during the progressive era, you get these Muckbreakers who are showing big problems in America, and Americans are saying, hey, we got to go do something about this. We got to go vote, okay? We got to go take back our governments. And remember, from the beginning, all these monopolies are having lots of power, and the government starts to go after them with the Sherman Anti-Trust Law and Clayton and all that. So here's the takeaway. Americans are starting to really get more power during the progressive era, thanks to these Muckrakers, thanks to all this good stuff that's going down, Teddy Roosevelt going after the trusts, all that. So things are getting better in America during this time period. That's what I want you to know, okay? Guys, hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. I know it got long there at the end. Some of this stuff is a little boring. I do apologize, but hopefully you got something out of it. And if anything, I hope you didn't get grossed out about eating meat, eating sausage. Shouldn't eat that stuff anyway. It's gross. It's bad for you. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. Please email me if you need anything. Remember to visit my website where you can find this PowerPoint, and let me know if there's anything at all I can do to help you. And guys, have a wonderful day. Take it easy. Bye.